The principal forced the janitor's daughter to perform. Her music left the whole school in silence. She was just a janitor's daughter, silent, overlooked, invisible. But when 15-year-old Nia Carter touched the piano, she ignited a fire that exposed injustice, challenged privilege, and shattered the gates of an elite academy. Bullied, betrayed, and silenced, she still chose to fight back, with nothing but music and truth. What she did on stage left an entire room breathless, and an entire system trembling. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story that moves your heart and opens your eyes. At 6:12 a.m., the steam hissed from a cracked radiator inside the janitor's supply room, and Nia Carter tied her hair into a low bun with the same green ribbon her mother had given her years ago. She adjusted her oversized hoodie, her father's old music department sweatshirt from back when he was a teacher, not the man sweeping hallways before sunrise. In the mirror above the sink, she caught her own eyes. Alert, quiet, guarded. That was how she needed to be at Woodmere Academy. Outside, Connecticut frost glistened on the iron gates as students in freshly pressed uniforms stepped out of German-engineered SUVs. Their chatter floated through the cold. Ski trips in Austria, brunches in Boston, dress fittings for private galas. Nia tightened the straps on her tattered backpack and slipped in through the side entrance, just behind her father. He was already at work, sweeping the foyer with practiced precision. Malik Carter used to direct full orchestras. Now he polished marble floors and changed paper towel rolls in faculty bathrooms. But he never complained. Not to Nia, not to anyone. Dignity, he always said, isn't about what you do. It's about how you do it. Nia ducked past him, barely meeting his eye. Not out of shame, but survival. If anyone saw her talking to the janitor, especially if they figured out she was his daughter, it would be over before the day even began. She moved through the school like smoke, taking up no more space than necessary. Fifth period. Latin, back corner. Lunch, always alone. And when someone did speak to her, it was usually Chloe Harper with her sugar-coated venom. "Did your dad teach you that, Nia?" she'd say with a faux smile, "when he was cleaning the faculty lounge?" That morning, Nia arrived early to her homeroom just to sit in silence. The wooden chair creaked under her as she unpacked her notebook, each page filled with doodles of piano keys, musical notations, and fragments of melodies she'd composed in her head but never played aloud. There was no piano in her apartment. Not since the move after her mother died. Not since they'd sold almost everything to cover hospital bills. Woodmere, though, had a grand piano. A gleaming black Bosendorfer that sat like a sleeping giant in the music room, untouched most days, used only by a handful of students with private instructors and long musical pedigrees. Nia had never dared touch it, until one Tuesday evening 3 months ago when she'd waited in the corridor while her dad waxed the faculty stairs. She'd crept in, lifted the fallboard, and pressed a single middle C. It rang like memory. Since that night she'd returned whenever she could, usually after dark when her father's keys unlocked hallways no student was meant to roam. She'd watch the door, tiptoe to the piano, and let her fingers speak in the language her mother taught her through lullabies and gospel hymns. But at school, Nia hid everything, especially from Chloe, whose father chaired the school board and donated annually to preserve tradition. Chloe played cello, or so she claimed, though no one ever heard her actually perform. What she did best was maintain social dominance. Her signature move? Asking you a question with no safe answer. That morning, Chloe sauntered in with her entourage, all wearing the same tailored tartan skirts and smug expressions. She plopped her Chanel bag on the desk beside Nia. "Hey, did anyone do the reading about Bach?" she asked the class loudly, flipping her hair. "I mean, why do people still care? It's not like he invented anything. Right, Nia?" Nia kept her eyes on her notebook, but something about the question burned. The ignorance, the condescension, the bait. She murmured without looking up. He standardized counterpoint and harmonic progressions that shaped every genre that came after him. The room fell quiet. Then Chloe laughed. "Wow! Google much?" Snickers followed. But Mr. Lewis, their substitute teacher and one of the few black educators at the school, leaned forward with interest. "That's correct," he said. "Continue, Ms. Carter." Nia hesitated, then slowly spoke. Bach's use of the well-tempered tuning system allowed for compositions in all keys. That opened the door for later composers, Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, to explore emotional depth and key modulation. Chloe rolled her eyes. "We're not in Juilliard, Professor." But the silence that followed told Nia something had shifted. She felt it again later that day in music appreciation class when Ms. Porter, the frail but sharp-eyed teacher who had taught at Woodmere for nearly 40 years, handed out listening assignments. As always, she played a few bars of a piece for the class to identify. When the notes of Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor rang out, half the class looked confused. Nia raised her hand. "Rachmaninoff, Opus 23, Number 5, she said. "Written in 1901. The prelude uses thick chords and a march rhythm to build tension." Ms. Porter tilted her head. "Correct. Nicely done, Nia." A few heads turned. Even Chloe looked unsure. After class, Ms. Porter called Nia to her desk. "You have a good ear," she said softly. "Where did you study?" Nia hesitated. "Nowhere. Private teacher?" "No, ma'am." "Then how?" "I listen." Ms. Porter didn't press. Instead, she smiled, a real one, and said, "Some musicians are trained. Some are called." Later that week, the school announced its annual Spring Arts Showcase. A polished email from Principal Sterling read, "This year's event will be by audition only. Due to our commitment to excellence, we invite students with a minimum of 3 years formal instruction and a recommendation from a certified instructor to apply." Nia didn't even consider it. The showcase was not for students like her. It was a curated event, a stage for legacy kids to prove their worth to legacy parents. Still, she read the email twice, then deleted it. But that night, as she waited in the library for her father's shift to end, she found herself doodling again, this time the opening phrase to a piece of her own, one she'd been building silently for months. A theme born from pain, with movements of hope, struggle, and defiance. She didn't know it yet, but she was writing the melody that would change her life. The library emptied slowly. At 6:40 p.m., the last student left. At 6:45, the night guard nodded off watching sports highlights on his phone. At 6:50, Nia slipped down the corridor, her sneakers making no sound on the carpeted hall. The music room was dark, but she didn't need light. Her hands found the keys like they always did. The first notes echoed against the walls, tentative, tender. Then, as she played through the crescendo, the music swelled into a fierce rhythm that startled even her. Her foot struck the damper pedal. The chords vibrated through her chest. She didn't hear the door open behind her. She didn't see Principal Sterling step in and freeze. She only heard music. When the final note faded, she opened her eyes and saw his reflection in the glossy surface of the piano. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice like cold steel, he asked, "Where did you learn to do that?" Nia stood slowly. "I taught myself." His expression didn't change. "Who gave you permission to use this room?" "No one. Wait here sometimes." He walked toward the piano, running a hand along the lid. "This Bosendorfer is worth more than your apartment lease, Miss Carter, and it's not a toy." Nia swallowed. "I wasn't—" "You weren't supposed to be here," he snapped. "This room is for authorized students only. Do you understand?" She nodded, pulse thudding in her ears. As he turned to leave, he paused in the doorway. "The PTA meeting is next week. I suggest your father attends. We'll be discussing school access and facility abuse." Then he left. That night, as Nia sat in the back seat of her father's rusted Honda, staring at the frost patterns on the window, she said nothing. Neither did he. But something inside her had cracked open, not from fear, from the sound of a door creaking shut, just enough to let in a sliver of light. And, for the first time in her life, Nia Carter wanted the whole world to hear her music. Not because she needed their approval, but because she was done being invisible. The Friday after her encounter with Principal Sterling, Nia felt like the walls of Woodmere Academy had eyes. She moved carefully, shoulders hunched slightly lower, trying to shrink her presence even more than usual. Every footstep echoed louder. Every passing glance seemed longer. Sterling hadn't said anything to her father, yet. But something told her that conversation was coming. At lunch, she sat by herself as always, peeling the edges of her peanut butter sandwich while the room swirled with laughter and mock debates about prom themes and Ivy League internships. Chloe sat 4 tables away, surrounded by the usual suspects: Anya, Harper, and Caleb, with her phone in one hand and a latte in the other. Nia noticed her glance toward her briefly, smirk, then whisper something that sent her friends into stifled giggles. She didn't have to hear the words to know they were about her. The performance, the piano, the janitor's daughter playing Chopin like she had any business doing so. Ms. Porter passed by and gave Nia a brief nod as she returned her lunch tray. There was something in the older woman's eyes, calm, firm, yet watchful, like a lighthouse beam cutting through storm fog. Nia wanted to ask her about the showcase, about the rules, about the chances for someone like her, but she stayed silent. She wasn't ready to be seen again. Not yet. Her father had noticed her restlessness at home. That night, while folding laundry in their tiny kitchen, Malik finally asked, "Did something happen at school, Nia?" She hesitated, holding a towel to her chest like a shield. "Sterling saw me in the music room." His hands stopped moving. "You were playing?" She nodded slowly. He let out a long breath. "Did he say anything?" "Not much. He said the PTA meeting next week would cover facility abuse." Malik rubbed his temples. "That man. I didn't mean to get you in trouble," she said quietly. "I just needed to play." He softened, walked to her, and gently lifted her chin. "Nia, don't ever apologize for your gift. Not to me. Not to anyone. You didn't do anything wrong." But wrong or not, she could feel the tension building around her like invisible tripwires coiled around the corners of her day. The next Tuesday, her Latin teacher was out sick, so the school filled the gap with an all-grade academic enrichment assembly in the theater. Nia took her usual spot near the exit, easiest to escape without notice. The auditorium buzzed with student noise until Principal Sterling stepped on stage in his signature charcoal suit and gold tie clip, tapping the microphone. "Good morning, students," he said with polished calm. "Today, we're delighted to welcome Chloe Harper, one of our most distinguished juniors, to present on the evolution of classical music in Western civilization, a topic she's researched independently for her upcoming Arts Fellowship submission." Nia felt her stomach drop. Of course. Chloe. Classical music. Independent research. Chloe strutted onto the stage, her blonde curls bouncing like the polished ribbons on her heels. She carried a tablet and a self-satisfied grin. The slideshow behind her lit up with stock photos of Beethoven, Mozart, and a few old oil paintings she clearly didn't know the titles of. "For centuries," Chloe began, "classical music has reflected the most refined expressions of culture and civilization. From Bach's early fugues to the expressive movements of Romantic composers like Tchaikovsky, it's been the domain of the truly educated." She paused for effect, then continued. "Today, unfortunately, this tradition is sometimes diluted, replaced with digital shortcuts or imitations by people with no formal training. But we must preserve excellence." The subtle jab was a hammer to Nia's ears. A few rows ahead, Caleb elbowed someone and nodded backward toward Nia. Chloe smiled sweetly and moved on to her next slide. But Nia had already stopped listening. Her chest burned, not with embarrassment this time, but something sharper. After the assembly, in the hallway outside the theater, she was gathering her books from her locker when she heard a voice behind her. "Guess they forgot to include you in the program." Chloe said, her tone honeyed and cruel. Maybe next year, if you manage to, I don't know, learn to read sheet music? Nia clenched her fists. You don't know anything about me. Oh, but we all saw you at the piano. Very cute, Chloe said. Like a little show pony someone taught a trick. Before Nia could reply, someone else stepped in. I've heard Nia play, said Daniel Alvarez, a senior known for his jazz trumpet solos. He had a quiet, thoughtful energy, more musician than jock, though he carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew the value of silence. She's better than half the kids in the music program, Chloe scoffed. Well, it's not a real program unless you have a resume. Sorry, but YouTube doesn't count. It does if you can move people, Daniel replied coolly. You ever done that? Chloe blinked. Excuse me? He didn't wait for an answer. See you around, Nia, he said, nodding before disappearing into the crowd. That night, Nia sat at her small desk in the corner of the apartment, fingers tracing invisible scales on the wood. Her father was asleep early, exhausted from back-to-back shifts, but her mind wouldn't rest. She thought of Bach's fugues, of Miss Porter's nods of approval, of Chloe's dagger smiles. She thought of Daniel, of how easily he'd stepped between her and humiliation, of what it would mean if someone like him believed in her music. She picked up her phone and opened the email again. Spring Arts. Showcase auditions, final deadline. Thursday, 5 p.m. The requirements were clear. Formal training. A letter from a certified instructor. Sheet music submitted in advance. She had none of those things. But she had Ms. Porter. The next morning, Nia waited until music class ended, then lingered by the piano as everyone else packed up. Ms. Porter noticed and sat down beside her. I want to audition, Nia said, even if I don't qualify. Ms. Porter's lips pressed together, but her eyes didn't waver. What would you perform? I wrote something. It's not finished yet, but it will be. Ms. Porter's eyes lit up like candlelight catching old glass. Original work? Nia nodded. Inspired by Chopin, and Nina Simone, and my mom. Porter took a long breath. They won't accept the application formally. Not without paperwork, but, she paused, lowering her voice, they can't stop you from playing. What do you mean? There's a mandatory PTA meeting Friday evening in the auditorium. That piano on stage will be tuned and ready. Her voice turned just the slightest bit mischievous. And if someone were to demonstrate a student's potential during public remarks, well, who could object? Nia stared at her. Do you mean? I mean, Miss Porter said gently, some notes speak louder than policy. Let them hear yours. For the next 2 days, Nia practiced after hours at Miss Porter's home, an old cottage with ivy-covered walls and a slightly out-of-tune upright piano in the parlor. She brought with her every note she'd stored in her head for years, every piece of melody she'd scratched into notebook margins and napkins. Ms. Porter gave her structure, corrected her phrasing, and taught her how to breathe through the difficult bars instead of tensing. Technique frees the soul, she said. You have the soul. Let's build you the wings. On Friday evening, Malik wore his one formal blazer and borrowed a tie from Reverend Owens. He and Nia arrived 15 minutes early and sat in the back of the auditorium, surrounded by families in designer suits and silk scarves. Principal Sterling stood by the stage, shaking hands and scanning the crowd with the precision of a military commander. When he spotted Nia, something flickered across his face. Surprise? Displeasure? Perhaps both. As the meeting began, Sterling delivered his opening remarks. Budget updates. Enrollment targets. Then he moved to the Spring Arts Showcase and the school's commitment to heritage, tradition, and the pursuit of excellence. Miss Porter, sitting on the front row, raised her hand politely. Principal Sterling, she said, before we continue, would you indulge a brief musical demonstration from a student who's shown remarkable initiative? Sterling's jaw tightened. Miss Porter, this isn't the venue. Surely, 5 minutes wouldn't be too disruptive. she replied, already standing. "Our families deserve to hear the talent their school nurtures." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Before Sterling could object again, Miss Porter turned to Nia. "Miss Carter, would you join us?" The room turned. All those eyes Nia had avoided for years. She rose slowly. Her feet felt like lead. But as she walked toward the piano, she remembered the way her mother hummed lullabies while folding laundry. She remembered the warmth of Daniel's words, the rhythm of her father's footsteps as he cleaned the halls alone at night. She sat at the piano, closed her eyes, and began to play. Not what they expected, not what the program dictated. Something entirely her own. The silence was unbearable. At first, when Nia's fingers lifted off the last note, there was only stillness, so complete it seemed the air itself held its breath. Her pulse pounded in her ears, her hands hovered above the Bosendorfer's keys, and her throat burned from how tightly she was clenching it shut. She kept her eyes closed for a heartbeat longer, unwilling to face the consequences of what she'd just done. Then she slowly opened them. She didn't know what she expected. Snickers, gasps, maybe even Sterling storming forward to cut the power, but what she saw instead was stillness. Real, stunned stillness. Dozens of PTA parents sat rigid in their seats, programs forgotten on their laps, eyes wide and mouths slightly parted. Chloe Harper's mother clutched her pearls. A few murmurs trickled through the room, uncertain, like the first raindrops of a storm that wasn't sure it wanted to fall yet. And then, from the front row, came the sharp crack of a single pair of hands clapping. Ms. Porter stood, leaning slightly on her cane but clapping with crisp, unwavering rhythm. That broke the spell. Scattered applause followed, hesitant at first, then swelling, some of it from students seated near their parents, some from a few teachers, and eventually even from members of the school board. Daniel Alvarez stood halfway up from his seat in the back, whistling softly between his fingers, his grin wide. Nia blinked. She wanted to smile, to cry, to run, but all she could do was bow her head in stunned disbelief. Her father, sitting at the very back of the auditorium, had risen to his feet, tears gleaming in his eyes. Nia caught his gaze, and for a second the entire crowd disappeared. It was just the two of them, the custodian, the invisible girl, and in that moment they were both seen. But the spell broke. The second Principal Sterling stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you, Miss Carter," he said, voice clipped. That was certainly unexpected. The microphone squealed slightly as he adjusted it, buying time. He gave Ms. Porter a side glance that could have ignited dry wood. She stared back, completely unfazed. Sterling cleared his throat. "While we all appreciate impromptu demonstrations of passion, it's important to remember that our Spring Arts Showcase is a curated event with specific requirements for participation. Years of formal instruction, examination credentials, instructor endorsement." He turned, half smiling, toward the audience. "Still, it's admirable how students can use their personal time to develop hobbies." Hobbies. The word sliced through the applause like a blade. Nia felt her cheeks burn. It was the same old strategy, discredit by minimization. But before she could even process her emotions, another voice rang out from the crowd. "That wasn't a hobby," said a woman seated 2 rows from the front. "That was skill." All heads turned. The speaker was an older black woman in a navy blazer, Dr. Yvonne Monroe, a well-respected music professor at Eastbridge College and a known advocate for youth arts access. Nia hadn't even seen her enter. Dr. Monroe stood slowly, eyes fixed on Sterling. "I don't know what your application rules are, Principal Sterling, but as someone who's taught at the collegiate level for 28 years, I can tell you that what I just heard wasn't mere mimicry. It was musical fluency. That young woman doesn't need your permission to be brilliant." Sterling's smile faltered, his hands tightening at his sides. The applause returned, louder this time, bolder. Chloe Harper sat frozen in her seat, visibly flushed. Several parents looked toward her father for reaction, but Mr. Harper kept his eyes on the floor, jaw clenched. After the meeting, Nia waited backstage, unsure whether to run, or stay, or collapse. Her legs still trembled from the performance. She'd never played before an audience that large. She'd never played her own music in public, period. What she had just done was beyond anything she ever imagined possible. Her father appeared first, cutting through the back hallway like a man on a mission. He didn't say anything, just pulled her into the kind of hug that left no room for breath or doubt. "You did it," he whispered into her hair. "You did it, baby girl." "I wasn't supposed to," she murmured into his chest. "Exactly," he said. "That's what made it matter." They were still standing like that when Ms. Porter approached, a soft smile on her face and a glint of something more, a plan, perhaps, in her eyes. "You turned a PTA meeting into a concert hall," she said. "Bravo!" Nia looked up, still dazed. "Will they let me play in the showcase?" Ms. Porter's smile dimmed slightly. "Sterling won't make it easy. He won't forget tonight. But he won't forget your playing either, and neither will they. I don't have the credentials." "Credentials are just paper," she said. "You have something far more valuable. Witnesses." Later that night, back at their apartment, Nia lay in bed while her father made chamomile tea in the kitchen, humming low under his breath. Her phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. It was a message from an unknown number. "You were incredible tonight. I hope you know that. Duchenne." Nia blinked in surprise. Zoe was one of the top violinists at Woodmere, practically royalty in the school's orchestra. She'd never spoken to Nia before, aside from the occasional hallway nod. Another message followed. "My parents weren't thrilled about me being there, but my grandma cried when you played. She says your fingers speak the truth. P.S. If you ever want to rehearse, we have a baby grand." Nia stared at the screen, overwhelmed. And just like that, the door cracked a little wider. But the week that followed proved just how determined Sterling could be. By Monday, posters for the Spring Arts Showcase had gone up around the school, but Nia's name wasn't listed among the performers. Chloe's was. So were Daniel's and Zoe's, but not hers. That same day, a revised participation guideline was posted on the school's digital bulletin board. All performers must submit proof of formal instruction and pass a minimum Level 4 practical examination from a recognized music board. The message was clear. "You're not welcome here." Nia stared at the screen in the hallway for a full minute, heart sinking. It didn't matter that she'd brought a room full of strangers to their feet. Sterling was moving the goalposts. That afternoon, Ms. Porter found her sitting alone behind the gym, knees pulled to her chest. "He's trying to erase what happened," Nia said without looking up, trying to make it seem like it was a one-time fluke. "It wasn't a fluke," Ms. Porter replied. "It was a threat." Nia looked up, confused. "You changed the narrative," the older woman explained. "You prove that brilliance can come from places outside their system. That's dangerous to men like Sterling, because it exposes the illusion that only their method creates excellence." Nia let the words sink in. "What do I do?" she asked finally. "You play louder," Ms. Porter said. "You keep playing until they can't pretend they don't hear you." And so she did. That week, Nia found herself an unlikely trio of allies. Daniel, Zoe, and a sophomore named Amara, who sang gospel like she was born with an organ in her throat. They began meeting in a disused practice room during lunch, technically off-limits without staff supervision, but Ms. Porter forgot to lock the door. There, in that dusty room with broken blinds and scuffed floors, Nia found her power. They played jazz improv, explored string arrangements, experimented with tempo and key changes. Zoe shared composition sheets she'd been too scared to show her orchestra teacher. Daniel brought in Miles Davis vinyls. Amara taught them how to loop spirituals into classical phrases. They made music that didn't fit any form, but filled every silence. And slowly, word spread. By Thursday, the hallways were buzzing again, not with mockery but with curiosity. Is it true she wrote that piece herself? I heard she doesn't even take lessons. Why'd they leave her name off the list? Naya heard the whispers but didn't react. She had her headphones on and her head high. Sterling noticed. That Friday, her father received an email from the school board requesting an immediate review of his employment documentation, specifically the residential address on his original application. It was the threat they'd always feared. Naya had risen, so now they would try to cut him down. The war had begun. When Naya stepped into school the following Monday, something in the air had shifted. It wasn't dramatic. Not like a movie where the bully suddenly apologized or the student body burst into applause in the cafeteria. No, it was subtler than that. Measured stares that lingered longer than usual, whispered conversations that stopped as she approached. Orchestra students eyeing her like a curiosity they'd overlooked for too long. She kept her shoulders squared and her steps even, just like her dad taught her when she was little and scared of the dark. Fear is loud, he'd told her. So you walk quiet, but hold yourself like thunder. That day, the thunder walked the halls of Woodmere. In the lunchroom, Daniel slid into the seat across from her without asking. He nodded, started eating, and after a moment asked, "Do you know Liszt's Transcendental Etudes?" Nia blinked. "Some of them." He nodded again. "Cool. You've got his fire, not his technique yet, but the same defiance. Want to jam after school? Where? The old AV room. Ms. Porter still has a key." And that was how it started. Not with banners or praise or even an apology, but with an invitation. The next day, Zoe joined them. She entered the practice room with her violin case slung over one shoulder, her uniform jacket unbuttoned in subtle rebellion. "If Sterling's going to pretend you don't exist," she said to Naya, "then I think it's time we get loud enough that he can't ignore you." By Thursday, the group had grown to 4. Amara Washington, a sophomore whose voice could peel wallpaper and heal broken bones, knocked softly on the practice room door after hearing Nia's improvisation echo through the hallway. "I heard that, and I knew I had to be in this room," she said. "That piece you played, was it yours?" Naya nodded. "I want to sing on it." And just like that, the underground ensemble was born. They met every lunch break, every afternoon they could steal, huddled in the forgotten corners of Woodmere with instruments that felt more like shields than tools. They played everything, from jazz standards to gospel hymns to bits of Rachmaninoff that Zoe insisted on dissecting with terrifying precision. Sometimes it was chaotic, other times electric. But always it was free. Ms. Porter hovered at the edges, offering guidance without control, letting the group find its rhythm naturally. She brought them sheet music, old vinyls, and tea on cold days. Her eyes sparkled when she listened to them rehearse, and when Naya finally played the second movement of her composition, now expanded to include a section inspired by field chants, Ms. Porter murmured, "You're building something holy." Of course, Sterling noticed. He wasn't blind. He saw the students gathering. He heard the whispers about the girl who played Chopin like she was born in Vienna and raised in Harlem. So he tightened the noose. On Friday, Naya was called into the counselor's office during 5th period. Ms. Kendall Patel, warm smile and sharp edges hidden under soft cashmere, gestured for her to sit. "Hi, Nia. Just wanted to check in after your performance last week." "It wasn't official," Nia said carefully. "Just a demonstration." "Of course." Ms. Patel shuffled her papers. "But it did stir quite a bit of attention, and Principal Sterling has asked that I look into a few enrollment details. Nothing serious, just due diligence." Nia sat very still. "Like what?" "Just confirming your current residence, making sure everything's up to date. Sometimes families move and forget to notify the school. You're still at 14 Wayfair Lane, correct?" Naya hesitated. That wasn't her real address. It was her aunt's, the one they'd used so she could attend Woodmere. Ms. Patel smiled tighter. "You don't have to answer now. just something to verify. Oh, and Principal Sterling also mentioned that, moving forward, access to school facilities, like music rooms, will be limited to students with documented program enrollment. Liability concerns, you understand? Nia left the office feeling like she'd been stripped of something invisible. Not just a room or a piano, but permission. Permission to belong. That afternoon, she rushed to the music wing as soon as the last bell rang, heart pounding. The hallway was silent. Her steps echoed unnaturally. When she reached the music room, she found a laminated sign taped to the door. Authorized personnel only. Contact main office for access. She pressed her forehead against the door's cool glass. Inside, the Bosendorfer waited, polished and pristine. A security guard stood beside it, arms crossed, pretending not to watch her. Nia turned away just as Ms. Porter rounded the corner. "They locked me out," Nia whispered. "They're trying to lock your music out," Ms. Porter corrected. "Not the same thing." She gently touched Nia's shoulder. "Come to my house. My upright's old, but faithful." But before Nia could respond, the intercom crackled to life. "Malik Carter, please report to the principal's office immediately." Nia's blood turned cold. Miss Porter straightened, her expression steely. "Go to the library. Wait for your father. I'll find out what's happening." Nia did as told, though her body buzzed with panic. She tried to read, to write, but the words blurred. She checked her phone every 2 minutes. By the time her father appeared in the doorway an hour later, her hands were trembling. He said nothing at first. His face was composed. Too composed. "Let's go home, Nia." In the car, they drove in silence until the traffic lights blinked red and there was nowhere to hide from truth. "They're investigating our address," Malik said finally, voice taut. "And they've suspended me, pending further review." Nia gasped. "No. They said I misrepresented our residency, that I knowingly provided false documentation." She turned to him, wide-eyed. "Dad, I'm so sorry. If I hadn't played—" "Stop," he said firmly. "Don't you dare apologize for who you are. What you have. It's not something you hide. It's something you share." "But now you could lose your job." He gripped the wheel tighter. "Then I lose it. But they don't get to erase you." That night, Nia couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the school doors slamming shut, the piano out of reach, her father standing in that office alone. By morning, she was raw with exhaustion and purpose. In the cafeteria, she sat at her usual table, ignoring the extra stairs. When Chloe walked by with her posse, she smirked. "Heard your dad's in trouble. Maybe you should stick to cleaning like him." Nia kept her eyes on her tray. "What's wrong? Too famous to talk now?" Chloe's friend giggled. Then, with a sudden swipe, Chloe's hand knocked Nia's lunch off the table. It crashed to the floor, spaghetti splattering across her sweater and jeans. "Oops," Chloe said, fake gasping. "Guess you'll have to mop that up. Good practice for your future." Before Nia could even rise, a voice boomed behind her. "That's enough." Mr. Davis, her history teacher, stormed over. "Principal's office, now." Chloe's mouth dropped. "But I—" "Now." She slunk away, and Mr. Davis knelt beside Nia, helping her gather the tray. "You okay?" "I'm fine," she lied. He looked her in the eye. "They're scared of you. People like Sterling, Chloe. They've built a world with locked doors. You just played your way through one. They don't know what to do with that." She nodded. Later that day, she checked the music board. A new announcement had been posted. Bold letters. New rules. Participants in the Spring Arts Showcase must provide at least 3 years of formal training with a certified instructor and submit examination scores. The message was crystal clear. Keep out. When she got in the car, her father was already gripping the steering wheel like it was a lifeline. "They're holding a hearing," he said. "About my suspension. About you. They're moving fast." Nia stared at her reflection in the window. "They're trying to break us." "Yes," he agreed softly. "They are." She turned to him. So, what do we do? He didn't answer at first. Then he pulled the car to the curb and looked at her, face weary but eyes ablaze. We fight. And that night, after dinner, Nia opened her composition notebook again. The pages were filled with fragments, pieces of music born from grief, from hope, from rage. Now, she began sketching something new, something that didn't sound like Chopin or Gershwin or Nina, something that sounded like her, a symphony of defiance, a requiem for silence, a beginning. The following week began with storms, both outside and in. On Monday morning, rain lashed the windows of Woodmere Academy as if trying to peel back its polished exterior. Thunder rolled low and long, echoing through the marble hallways where whispers had become more potent than announcements. Everyone had heard about the investigation, about Malik Carter's suspension, about the residency fraud. But no one spoke to Nia directly, not the students, not most of the teachers. They looked, though. Oh, they looked, as if watching something unravel before their eyes, uncertain whether to pity it or fear it. Nia moved through the halls like smoke, but her steps were slower now, heavier. Her headphones stayed in, but no music played, just silence, a silence that seemed safer than facing her thoughts. In the practice room, she tried to play. Daniel, Zoe, and Amara were already inside, tuned and ready. But when Nia placed her fingers on the keys, nothing came. She struck a few chords, too hard, too fast, then jerked her hands away as if the instrument had scalded her. "I can't," she whispered. Daniel stepped closer. "What's going on?" "They're going to kick me out. They're going to fire my dad." Her voice cracked. "And I'm just sitting here pretending music can fix that." Zoe set down her violin. "You're not pretending." Nia turned toward her. "Yes, I am. This is all fake. They made new rules just to keep me out. And now people are saying I cheated, that Miss Porter wrote my piece. Someone posted on the school forum that I probably stole it from YouTube." Amara came forward, her voice low and certain. "If they're scared enough to lie, that means your truth is louder." But Nia wasn't listening anymore. Her chest ached. Her fingers trembled. The room spun in slow motion. She rose, grabbed her bag, and bolted before anyone could stop her. She didn't go home. Instead, she walked in the rain until her shoes soaked through and her hoodie clung to her skin. She found herself in front of the Harmony Community Center, a modest brick building nestled between an old laundromat and a gospel church. Its sign, partially rusted, read, "Harmony, a place to make your voice heard." Inside, the air smelled like cinnamon and floor polish. Kids were scattered in clusters, reading, drawing, practicing dance moves in squeaky sneakers. In one corner, a piano stood like a sentinel. A man with long locks and a gentle demeanor was teaching a small group of children how to read sheet music. Nia stood awkwardly in the doorway. The man looked up and smiled. "You must be Marcus's friend," he said. "Or the girl who lit up every parent's phone at that PTA meeting." She hesitated. "How did you—" "My brother's Mr. Davis. He called me right after it happened. Said, 'James, I just heard a student play something that broke a room open.'" He grinned. "That was you, right?" She nodded shyly. James stood, brushing off his jeans. "This room's yours if you want it. She's a little out of tune, but she listens." Nia stepped toward the upright piano, hands hovering just above the keys. She didn't play her new piece. She didn't even play something structured. She just let her hands move. Slowly at first, then faster. Improvised chords, aching melodies, the kind of musical language that had no name but spoke of storm clouds, betrayal, and survival. When she finally stopped, the children had gone quiet. "You play like you've seen things," James said softly. "You want to come back tomorrow?" She nodded. That became her refuge. After school, she would take the long bus ride to Harmony, and with James Davis's guidance, she began something new, rewriting her composition from the inside out. She called it The Unwritten, because that's what it felt like. A story she wasn't supposed to tell, played on keys she was never meant to touch. Meanwhile, Malik Carter was preparing for war. He met with Marjorie Turner, a fierce, sharp-tongued community advocate who had helped dozens of families fight discrimination in the district. She reviewed his documentation, his lease, the email trail. She took notes like a stenographer in court. "This isn't about an address," she said, tapping her pen against her notepad. "It's about optics. You embarrassed them. They're retaliating. We're going to build a case." "Won't be easy," Malik said. "They've got a board full of lawyers." "But we've got something they don't," she replied. "A daughter who just became a symbol." Within days, word began to spread. Community members who had seen the viral clip from the PTA meeting started organizing. Local musicians volunteered to give Naya free lessons. A nearby youth orchestra offered her a practice space. And Dr. Monroe, the music professor who'd stood up during her performance, called to request a meeting with both father and daughter. "I'm hosting a conference in 2 weeks," she said. "I'd like Nia to perform, not as a student, but as an artist." It was the kind of opportunity Nia had dreamed of, the kind that should have felt like soaring. But when she got home that night, she found her father sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a crumpled letter in his hands. "What is it?" she asked. He looked up, face unreadable. "Eviction notice." She blinked. "What?" "They're claiming unauthorized occupancy." Same day, the school issued a formal suspension. Someone pulled strings. Nia sat down, heart pounding. "What are we going to do?" Before he could answer, a knock came at the door. It was Reverend Holt from Greater Grace Baptist Church. "We heard," he said simply. "The congregation has a small apartment over the community hall. It's not much, but it's clean and warm. It's yours for as long as you need." Nia stared at him speechless. "The community takes care of its own," he said, smiling. "And right now, we've decided you're ours." They moved the next day. Church members arrived with boxes, food, blankets. The youth choir made welcome cards. Someone had even donated a digital keyboard. In the middle of the chaos, Zoe showed up at the door, soaked from the rain. "My parents found out I was helping you," she said, cheeks flushed. "They said I was making things political, but my grandmother disagrees." From behind her stepped an elderly woman with snow-white hair and wise eyes. "She trained at the Shanghai Conservatory," Zoe explained, "and she thinks your phrasing is exquisite." The old woman smiled, placed a stack of sheet music in Nia's hands, and said in accented English, "Play louder." The following Sunday, the Harmony Community Center hosted an impromptu performance. Word had spread so quickly that the room was standing room only. Children lined the floors. Elderly couples leaned forward in folding chairs. Community leaders sat side by side with street musicians. Miss Porter arrived, despite her failing health, and sat in the front row with tissues clutched in one hand. Nia played The Unwritten. All of it. She played it like it was her last chance to breathe. Each phrase bled into the next. Classical structures weaved with gospel tension and jazz syncopation. At the heart of it was something raw and defiant, something that sounded like a door being kicked open. When the final note faded, the silence cracked open. And then, an ovation. Not just clapping. Shouts. Tears. Someone hollered, "Let her in!" Dr. Monroe stood, eyes bright. "You're not a student. You're a movement." Later that night, Marjorie Turner called. "I just got word. They're expediting the disciplinary hearing." Nia swallowed. "When?" "Next Friday." Malik leaned back in his chair, exhausted. "They want to bury us fast." "But they won't," Marjorie replied, "because we're not alone anymore. And this isn't just a hearing. It's a spotlight. And once that light's on them, it's going to be hard to hide what they've done." Nia didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window of their temporary apartment, hands on the digital piano, headphones in. She didn't write music that night. She wrote resolve. Because now, it wasn't just about playing. It was about fighting. And for the first time, she knew she wasn't fighting alone. The days leading up to the hearing passed in a blur of quiet tension and flickers of hope. Malik moved through them like a man balancing on a wire, calm on the surface, but Nia could see the exhaustion pressing into his face like an invisible hand. His back ached more than usual. He'd stopped humming in the mornings. Still, he never missed a night walking her to the Harmony Center. It was there, under the low, warm light of the old church hall's rehearsal space, that the unwritten evolved into something else entirely. Daniel's trumpet now opened the piece with a raw, unfiltered vibrato, while Zoe added a thread of minor key violin that pulled the listener into stillness. Amara's voice soared through the center of it all, not singing words, but vocalizing emotion, grief, defiance, wonder. It had become a tapestry, woven not just from notes, but from survival. One night, as they rehearsed the final movement, Ms. Porter entered quietly through the side door. She leaned against the wall with her cane in one hand and a small smile on her lips. When they finished, she clapped slowly, her eyes shining with a glimmer of something fierce. "They're going to hear this," she said, "and they won't know what to do with it." "We're performing it at the showcase," Zoe said, glancing at Nia. "No," Nia replied, her voice soft but certain. "We're performing it at our showcase." That idea had started small, born in the back of the Reverend Holt's office over tea and quiet fury. The more they talked about Woodmere's gates, their rules, their walls, the more they realized they didn't need to beg for entry anymore. They could build their own stage. By Thursday, the plan had taken shape. The Harmony Community Center would host a parallel event on the same night as the Spring Arts Showcase, not in defiance, at least not explicitly, but in celebration of voices that had been ignored. "We'll call it the Community Talent Night," Reverend Holt proposed. "Inclusive, simple. Let them call it whatever they want. We'll know what it really is." Ms. Porter smiled from across the table. "A reclamation." Local businesses chipped in within days, donating chairs, renting lights, offering refreshments. Dr. Monroe secured the loan of a Steinway from a downtown conservatory. A retired audio engineer volunteered to run sound. Social media did the rest. Flyers appeared on community boards. Posts trended with hashtags like #LetHerPlay and #UnwrittenStage. A photo of Nia, eyes closed at the Harmony Center piano, was shared over 10,000 times in a single weekend. The morning Principal Sterling found out, he called an emergency assembly. Nia sat in the second-to-last row of the auditorium, headphones on, but volume low. His voice was tight with barely concealed rage. "It has come to my attention," he said, "that some students are planning to attend a separate event this Friday, in conflict with our long-standing Spring Arts Showcase." He paused, scanning the audience. "Let me be clear. Attendance at the official showcase is mandatory for all students in music-related programs. Absence will result in a failing grade for the semester." There were audible gasps. Several students exchanged wide-eyed glances. Nia didn't react. She saw through the threat. It was desperation disguised as policy. Later that day, Thomas Harper, Chloe's father and a longtime school board donor, scheduled a private meeting with Sterling. "My phone won't stop ringing," he hissed, slamming the office door. "The Equality Commission is asking questions. A journalist called me last night. You told me you had this under control." "I'm enforcing the rules," Sterling replied coolly. "The Carter girl falsified her enrollment. Her father lied about their address. None of which mattered until she outplayed your golden students." Sterling stiffened. "That's not the issue." "But it looks like the issue," Harper snapped. "The optics are catastrophic. She's a gifted black girl from the wrong side of town, and we're the villains. That's the narrative. So, unless you want to see Woodmere on the 6 o'clock news, I suggest you find a way to adapt." That afternoon, Malik received a call from the school. Sterling wanted to meet. Reluctantly, Malik agreed. He and Nia arrived at the school office just after sunset. The campus was almost empty, the marble hallways echoing beneath their footsteps. Inside the conference room, Sterling sat with a manila folder and a forced smile. "Mr. Carter," he began, "after careful consideration, I'm prepared to offer a generous resolution." Malik said nothing. Sterling continued. "Your daughter may participate in the Woodmere Showcase, provided you agree to sign this acknowledgement of residency violation. In exchange, we'll reclassify your departure as a voluntary resignation, offer a neutral reference for future employment, and quietly resolve the matter." He smiled as if sealing a deal on a used car. "Everyone saves face." Nia felt the breath leave her body. Sterling's offer was everything she wanted. Access, recognition, a seat at the table, but it came with a price that felt like betrayal. She looked at her father. Malik's jaw was tight, his eyes unreadable. He picked up the folder, opened it, and stared at the form. Then, without a word, he closed it and pushed it back. "No," he said, "we won't trade dignity for opportunity." Sterling's face hardened. "This offer won't be repeated." Malik stood. "Then we'll see you at the hearing." As they walked out, Nia felt a strange rush. Not fear, not even anger. Something steadier. She didn't want their stage anymore. She wanted her own. Back at the Harmony Center, the final preparations were underway. Volunteers tested lights, tuned the borrowed piano, set up rows of chairs. James Davis handed out programs with the hand-lettered title, The Unwritten Showcase. Nia rehearsed alone on stage, fingers gliding over the keys like wind over water. She didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think about Woodmere. She thought about her mother. She thought about that first night at the piano, fingers trembling in the dark, afraid to be heard. Now, she wanted the whole world to listen. As the sun set, people began arriving. Dozens, then hundreds. Families from every part of town. Teachers from rival schools. Musicians. Reporters. Even a few Woodmere parents slipped in, pretending not to be seen. In the front row, Miss Porter sat beside Malik and Dr. Monroe. Behind them, Amara adjusted her mic, Zoe tuned her violin, and Daniel tapped his trumpet mouthpiece against his palm like a heartbeat. At exactly 7 p.m., Reverend Holt stepped on stage. "Tonight," he said, "we witness not just talent, but truth." He introduced Nia last. She walked on stage in her mother's favorite white blouse, her hair pulled back in a braid. The room hushed. Cameras flicked on. Cell phones rose like candles. She sat, and she played. The unwritten began soft, uncertain, like a child tapping glass from the inside. Then it grew, gathering weight, momentum. A melody that stumbled, recovered, then soared. Daniel's trumpet cried like a streetlight lost in fog. Zoe's violin sang through grief. Amara's voice, raw, wordless, holy, rose like smoke into the rafters. The final movement combined them all, building into a crescendo so visceral, so furious that the audience could hardly breathe. When the last chord faded, there was no silence. Only thunder, applause, shouts, tears, people on their feet, strangers embracing, reporters racing forward. Nia looked toward the back of the hall and gasped. A familiar face stood in the doorway. Professor David Reynolds, Juilliard's pre-college division. He had flown in from New York. Ms. Porter stepped forward to whisper something in Malik's ear. He nodded, eyes wide. Later, backstage, Professor Reynolds extended his hand to Nia. "I watched the video," he said, "but it didn't prepare me for this. You're not just a pianist, you're a storyteller." He pulled out an envelope. "I'd like to offer you a full scholarship to our summer program, if you'll accept it." Nia's eyes blurred with tears. She turned to her father. He nodded, voice thick. Yes, she will. And, for the first time in weeks, she let herself cry. Not from fear, but from joy. The morning of the official Spring Arts Showcase at Woodmere Academy arrived cloaked in nervous anticipation. The clouds hung low, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Naya sat by the window in the small church apartment, cradling a mug of tea that had long gone cold. Her digital keyboard sat untouched in the corner, its keys like closed lips. The Harmony Community Center was already buzzing. Volunteers were sweeping floors, stringing lights, arranging chairs, again. But this time it wasn't just a showcase, it was a declaration. A quiet uprising dressed in music and truth. A place where excellence didn't need permission. But across town, Woodmere gleamed under polished chandeliers, its velvet curtains drawn, its grand stage pristine and waiting. The auditorium was packed with donors, board members, and proud parents. Chloe Harper stood backstage in a gown of deep emerald, clutching her sheet music. Her hands were steady, but her mind was not. She'd practiced her piece to perfection. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. But ever since the Carter girls' performance, something in her confidence had cracked. People whispered now, not in praise of her precision, but in awe of a storm they couldn't control. And worst of all, her father had grown quiet. Sterling passed her with a forced nod and whispered, "Play well. We need this." She didn't reply. At 6:00 p.m., both events began. Backstage at Harmony, Nia stood with Daniel, Zoe, and Amara, her pulse a flutter of nerves and fire. The makeshift curtain rustled as the packed crowd murmured, many already standing in the back or sitting on the floor. Reverend Holt stepped onto the stage again, this time with a warmth in his voice that bordered on reverence. "Good evening, friends," he began. "Tonight isn't about rivalry. It's about reclaiming a stage. It's about honoring the voices that were overlooked, silenced, or told they had to wait their turn. This is the unwritten stage, and it begins now." The audience applauded, not politely, but with something wilder, more intimate. Naya could feel their energy wrap around her like a heartbeat. The first few performers took the stage, spoken word artists, a ballet duo from the South End, a gospel choir of children who brought the crowd to its feet. Then came Daniel, playing a jazz solo that sounded like smoke curling into moonlight. Zoe followed, her bow slicing through Tchaikovsky with a fury that made the room tremble. Amara sang next, delivering a soul ballad so raw that even Miss Porter wiped away tears from the front row, and then it was Nia's turn. She walked to the piano alone, the spotlight soft on her face. Her hands hovered above the keys for a moment, suspended in silence. She didn't need to look at the crowd to know who was there. Her father, Ms. Porter, Dr. Monroe, Professor Reynolds. But there were others, too. Families she'd never met. Neighbors from 3 zip codes over. A row of Woodmere students sitting shoulder to shoulder, uniforms traded for T-shirts and hope. And then she played. Not Claire de Lune, not Bach. She played her own piece, the unwritten, in its final form. It started with a whisper, a lone melody rising out of nowhere, trembling but deliberate. Then came the second voice, a counter-melody like a hand reaching through a locked door. Daniel's trumpet joined, low and mournful. Zoe's violin wrapped around them like vines. Amara stepped forward, not singing lyrics, but harmonizing. An aria of ache and defiance. The piece rose, folded, bent, and bloomed. There were moments of pure silence where even the air paused to listen. Moments where the keys struck so hard it felt like bones breaking into freedom. And then, in the final movement, Nia stood, mid-performance, and played the last passage standing, her entire body leaning into the keys as if to say, "This is me." When the final note faded, there was a beat of silence, followed by a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. Nia rose from the bench, breathless, eyes shining with tears she didn't fight. Malik stood in the front row, clapping with his whole body, his eyes never leaving his daughter. Miss Porter leaned into Reverend Holt and whispered, "She didn't just play music. She rewrote the rules." But not everyone was clapping. In the back of the room stood a man in a gray suit, Gregory Sterling. He hadn't planned to come. But curiosity had bested pride. He'd watched from the shadows, arms crossed. And what he saw unraveled something inside him, a truth he'd buried long ago. That power wasn't about controlling the stage, it was about what happened when you finally let the music speak. Across town, at Woodmere, the atmosphere was different. Chloe had just finished her performance. It was technically flawless, but the applause was thin, polite. Something felt off. Something was missing. As she exited the stage, she caught her father's expression from the audience, distant, unimpressed. In the lobby, murmurs had already begun. Someone had pulled up the Harmony live stream. A parent had shown a clip of Nia's performance to an entire row. And then it happened. Midway through the intermission, half the audience began to leave. By the time Sterling returned to the Woodmere stage to deliver his closing remarks, the auditorium was half empty. The applause, this time, was tepid and hollow. That night, social media exploded. Clips from The Unwritten were shared across music platforms, local news outlets, and even picked up by NPR's Tiny Desk as the performance of the year. The hashtags #UnwrittenStage and #LetHerPlay trended nationally. Offers poured in, from Juilliard, from Berkeley, from community foundations wanting to fund a scholarship in Nia's name. Sterling resigned quietly 2 days later. Chloe Harper took an indefinite leave of absence from school, and Woodmere Academy, for the first time in its century-old history, publicly committed to a full review of its arts admission policies. But none of that mattered to Nia as much as what happened the following week. She was sitting on the steps of the Harmony Center when Malik handed her a small velvet box. Inside was her mother's ring. Gold, simple, with a music note etched inside. "She wore this the day we found out about you," Malik said. "She wanted you to have it when you found your voice." Nia held it gently, slipping it onto her finger. "I didn't find my voice," she whispered. "You gave me the space to use it." He wrapped his arms around her. "And I always will." That weekend, she performed again. This time not for a crowd, not for cameras, but for herself. Just her, the keys, and an empty room. She played a new melody. One she hadn't written yet. One that was just beginning. A melody without walls, without gates, without permission. Because she knew now. No one could silence what was meant to be heard. A month after the Unwritten showcase, spring rolled into early summer with the scent of jasmine thick in the air. The Harmony Community Center was quieter now, its halls no longer vibrating with frantic rehearsals or last-minute microphone checks. But something in the air had shifted, like the ground had realigned beneath the city's feet. Nia sat at the upright piano near the window, bathed in afternoon light, her fingers idly tracing over the keys. She wasn't composing today, she was just breathing, letting the silence wrap around her like a blanket. Her world had changed, and yet, somehow, it hadn't. Malik had started a new job at a non-profit music organization. They helped underprivileged schools repair and distribute old instruments. He wasn't making as much as he did at Woodmere, but he came home lighter. He laughed more now. And when he walked into the apartment after work, his shoulders weren't so tight anymore. Nia's Juilliard summer program was just 2 weeks away. It still didn't feel real. She had the acceptance letter taped to her wall, right above her bed, along with a printout of the Harmony Showcase program and a photo of her, Amara, Zoe, and Daniel taken just after they performed. All of them sweaty and giddy and still riding the high of having their truth heard. But with the stillness came reflection and questions. Not everything had been wrapped up in a neat bow. There were loose ends, lingering truths no one had spoken out loud. One of them was named Chloe Harper. Nia hadn't seen her since the night of the dual showcases. She'd heard rumors about the family pulling strings to hush a brewing scandal, about Chloe skipping out on the rest of the semester, and about Thomas Harper threatening to withdraw donations if Woodmere didn't control the narrative. But Nia couldn't forget her. Not the sharpness of her eyes, not the way her fingers hovered over the piano as if afraid of what they might reveal. So when Chloe emailed her, 2 lines, no subject, Nia stared at the screen for a long time. "Can we meet? I owe you something." They chose a small coffee shop halfway between their neighborhoods. Neutral ground. No uniforms, no stages, just two girls, one piano-shaped shadow between them. Chloe arrived 10 minutes early, her blonde hair tied back in a braid, her posture rigid. When Nia walked in, Chloe stood, then hesitated, as if she wasn't sure if a hug was appropriate. Nia just nodded and sat down. "I saw your performance," Chloe said after a beat. "Online." "I figured." "It was—" She stopped herself. "It was more than music." Nia looked at her evenly. "So why now?" Chloe exhaled. "Because I lied." Nia didn't flinch, but her heart thudded louder. "I knew about your audition piece," Chloe continued. "I overheard Ms. Porter talking to the head of department. I knew it was yours. I knew you didn't steal it, but I let them believe otherwise. I didn't correct anyone when they said it was fake. I wanted to win." Her voice cracked just slightly. "My dad told me that survival in our world meant protecting your edge. He said if you weren't willing to guard your name, someone else would rewrite it for you." "And what do you believe?" Nia asked. Chloe looked down. "I think I was wrong. I think I envied you." That landed like a stone. "I had everything," Chloe said, "but I didn't feel anything. Your music—" She shook her head. "You bled into those keys. And I hated that you made me feel small, but now I think I just felt seen for the first time. And it scared me." Silence lingered between them. Finally, Chloe reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "It's a letter. For the school board. A full statement. I already submitted it, but I wanted you to have a copy. No strings attached." Nia took it. The paper inside was neatly folded, the handwriting careful. Chloe's confession, in black ink. "I don't want forgiveness," Chloe said. "I just want to be honest." Nia studied her, then nodded. "Thank you." They parted outside the cafe. No promises to stay in touch, no hugs, just an unspoken understanding between two girls who had both been bent, but not broken, by a system that thrived on silence. The next day, Malik read the letter. "She didn't have to do this," he said quietly. "No," Nia agreed, "but she did." And that, somehow, made all the difference. In the days that followed, more ripples formed. A local news station ran a follow-up feature on the Harmony Showcase. NPR invited Nia for a radio interview, and a small publishing house specializing in youth voices reached out, asking if she'd consider turning her journey into a book of essays and musical reflections. But Nia kept her head grounded. Fame wasn't her goal. Truth was, the final performance before her Juilliard departure came unexpectedly. Dr. Monroe invited her to perform at a conference for arts educators, a panel about access and equity in elite programs. She would close the event with a solo. The venue was intimate, a small theater with just 100 seats, mostly filled with music teachers, composers, and policy advocates. Backstage, Nia warmed up her fingers, not on scales, but on fragments of the unwritten. The notes had evolved again, softer now, wiser. When she stepped onto the stage, there was no fanfare, no fan club, just the piano, and a hush. She began with a new piece, an untitled composition still forming. It didn't blaze or rage, it meandered, it mourned. It remembered, but in the end, it reached upward. When she finished, no one moved for a moment, and then someone stood, and another, and then applause. Not the roaring kind, the reverent kind. Afterward, a woman approached her, a teacher from a school on the west side. She held Nia's hand with both of hers. "You reminded me why I teach," she said. Back home, Malik was waiting with 2 packed bags and a tired smile. The flight to New York was at dawn. He would accompany her, stay long enough to see her settled. "Ready?" he asked. Nia looked around the apartment, the modest kitchen, the worn couch, the window with the view of nothing but rooftops, and nodded. "Yes, but I'm taking all of this with me." He raised an eyebrow. Even the leaking faucet? She grinned. Especially that. At the airport, just before boarding, Malik pulled her into a long, quiet hug. "You are your mother's dream, Nia," he whispered, "and my promise kept." As the plane lifted into the clouds, Nia pressed her forehead to the window. Below, the city stretched out like a sheet of music. Messy, wild, unfinished. Perfect. Juilliard was a new world, challenging, exhilarating, and humbling all at once. The professors didn't coddle. The students were elite. But Nia held her own. Not because she played louder, but because she played with something deeper. She wasn't just performing. She was telling stories. At night, after rehearsals, she'd write, pages and pages, letters to her mother, letters to the girls like her who'd been told to wait, letters to silence, thanking it for being the first canvas. And every time she sat at the piano, whether in a studio, on a sidewalk, or inside her own head, she remembered. The music didn't save her. She saved herself. But the music told the world she was worth hearing. At its heart, this story isn't just about music or injustice or young girls' rise against the odds. It's about the unshakable power of voice, of knowing who you are, even when the world tries to rewrite your truth. Nia Carter's journey reminds us that talent without access can be silenced, but truth fueled by courage becomes unstoppable. We live in a world where gates, literal and invisible, are placed to separate the privileged from the persistent. But when a community believes in someone, when mentors lift and protect instead of control, those gates begin to fall. Nia didn't just fight to play on a stage, she built her own. And by doing so, she invited others who had been left in the margins to step into the light with her. This story also teaches us about redemption. People like Chloe, once complicit in the system, chose to confront their privilege and speak the truth. That, too, is bravery. Because justice is not only found in loud protests, it's also found in quiet reckonings, in letters written, and in hands extended. And finally, we are reminded that our dreams are not defined by the institutions that reject us, but by the fire within us that refuses to go out. Whether you're a musician, a teacher, a parent, or just someone trying to be seen, you matter. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. Now we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next powerful story from Hearts and Harmony. Thank you for staying with us until the end.